You guys don't mind grabbing pizza, finding the spot if I get going here in a second? Otherwise, we will bring oh, there you go. Grab a seat, make yourself comfortable. I'm sorry. Next time. That's all. Yeah.
It's really just talking with those guys. I haven't
Thank you all for coming to the meetup this week. We have a very special guest with us today. Really thank John West for joining us. We'll start here in a second. Do want to thank people who really helped coordinate this week. Mike Reynolds worked a lot with John on logistics to get him here. Mike Congdon, Derek Dicer for their usual meetup coordination work. I want to welcome a new sponsor to the Milwaukee Sitecore Developer Meetup, and that is Centium and their MVP, Mark Survey. They'll also be helping organizing the event going forward. For this week, we want to thank Hanson Dodge for the pizza and, as always, the location. So we are looking at some move things around, mix things up a bit going forward, and also to Active Commerce for the very Milwaukee beverages that we're welcoming John with here today. So I want to again welcome John West, CTO of Sitecore. I find it hard to believe that there would be anyone in the room who hasn't referenced a John West SDN post or blog post or some other form of knowledge sharing in their Sitecore work. I think John's going to describe this as a bit of a farewell tour for him, which is sad, but he will forever reign as the post king on SDN, that's for sure. So thanks a lot, John. Welcome.
So this is kind of an easy presentation for me and a hard presentation because it's not technical. And technical stuff's a lot easier for me to present. But what's hard about it is that I don't have anything prepared. So I'm just here to tell my story. So I'll start by, again, repeating some of what Nick said. Thanks for being here at the user group. And more importantly, thanks for being part of the Sitecore community. So I've been with Sitecore for 11 years. We started with almost no community. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the SDN4 forums. We did have a site before SDN, the current SDN, and there was very little interaction on those forums. And we started a Yahoo forum, a Yahoo group, and there was some activity on that forum. And then we started the Sitecore Developer Network forums, and it grew. And we really see a lot of activity on the community.sitecore.net. So the community behind Sitecore is very strong, and that's really important to me. It's really interesting. I was talking to somebody last night at a user group in Ohio that was talking about the user group behind an open source .NET web content management platform, and just how unpleasant that community is, how people are trying to hide their knowledge from each other, they're trying to sell their knowledge to each other. And that's not the kind of community that I want to work with. It's not the community that I hope that I've fostered in the time that I've been with Sitecore. So all of you are part of that community, and that's what makes it a great product to work with, and a great environment for developers that are learning this new technology relatively quickly. So I'll just step back for a second and give an introduction. My name is John West. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Sitecore. And I used to stay in North America, but I ended up working for corporate. So technically, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Sitecore worldwide, but that title is really misleading. So if that gives you the impression that I have any influence within the company over product or management or anything like that, that's misleading. It's just a title. And the title that I would give myself if I could choose one for the work that I've done for the past maybe 5 or 7 years would be something like Chief Developer Advocate. So what I'm trying to do is look at the product from your perspective. So not looking at our roadmaps and collateral and those kind of things, what we say we're delivering, but actually looking at the bits that we're putting in your hand and the resources and the documentation, the things that go along with it, what it would be like to work with this product, and what can we do to improve that experience of working with the product for developers. So that's really my goal within Sitecore. And so when Nick says this is a farewell tour, that's the role that I've kind of, I'm not going to say just pushed out of, but that's what I'm not going to be doing anyway. There's just other value within the company that they want me to provide. So I can't be doing the blogging, the community stuff, the forums, all of those kind of things anymore. So that's just where things are going. I have a couple of notes that I wrote last night before my presentation. So I just actually kind of want to get an idea of the audience. So how many people here would consider themselves architects, developers, engineers, as opposed to business or management kind of people? So it's all developers, basically. There are a couple of people that would not say that's true. And just kind of getting an idea of what's happening in the market, how many people would say that they're focused primarily on MVC solutions at this point, as opposed to web forms? So a little bit less than half, I would say, which is actually a little bit higher than we see in general. We do see a movement towards MVC, but a lot of organizations are still using web forms for a variety of reasons. So trying to get an idea of how far back people's experience with Sitecore goes. Anybody working with Sitecore 8 right now? So not that many. A lot of people still working on 7. Everybody that is working on or did work on 7, could you raise your hands? Anybody here that worked on 6 or is still working on 6? Either. And then 5, anybody here worked on 5? Really? And 4? No. Sitecore 4 is an interesting product. In 2004, when I joined Sitecore 4 really was the best ASP.NET CMS on the market, probably the best CMS on the market. But when I look at the screenshots now, it's kind of embarrassing. It just, you can see the 2004 all over it. So anyway, that was just for my information. My goals here tonight, I have a few goals. I'm really about fostering the community. And since I can't be doing that role anymore, I'm kind of pushing everybody else to do that role for me. So I'm encouraging everybody here to, if you don't have a blog, start a blog. When people ask you questions, try to help them with those questions. It's easier for us as developers to kind of insulate ourselves in our offices and not help other people and be frustrated by the noobs, especially if you've been doing it for a long time and you see that same question for the 300th time and you really don't want to answer it. That's actually one of the reasons that I did a lot of the blogging. Going totally out of order, but I'm just going to flow. The blog, the reason I started the blog was because I was doing a lot of sales presentations and trainings, and I was developing these little snippets of code. I never work on production Sitecore solutions. I only do little tiny trainings or prototypes or forum posts and things like that. And I had all of this stuff that was all over the place. And this was back in the days of Windows XP, so you were reinstalling XP every 6 months to clean it up, and I would lose all my files, and I would move from one machine to another or be at a remote location, and I couldn't access all the data that I had collected about Sitecore. So I decided to make a blog just really for myself. So where could I put my resources so that I could find them when I needed to? And it turned out that people started reading it and then responding to it, and then I realized, well, this is a platform for not just evangelizing about Sitecore, but educating the customer base and the developer base. And the reality is that writing documentation is a really serious challenge. We have requirements for grammar and formatting and screenshots and all these kind of things. It's much easier to write a blog post and to post code into a blog post. And you can put all sorts of caveats like this is untested and you should consider these concerns. And so the blog really fills gaps in the documentation and actually often becomes fodder for the documentation team when they need to write the documentation. So I'm always trying to get as much value out of one piece of work as possible. So if I help somebody on the Sitecore Developer Network forums, I've done some work, some analysis, some code, whatever it is, I take that and I write a blog post about it. If it's significant enough, I'll try and do a user group about it. If it's even more significant, I'll try and do a symposium or some other user group, higher level user group about it. So always trying to reuse the work that I've done already, and the blog has been really great for that. And the way I got into this was, when somebody does ask me a question, I always want to be able to respond with a link and say, just do the research, read this, and then refine your question. If you still have a question after reading this, then we'll get to your more specific question. So trying to avoid the really general and repeated questions by having blog posts. So not all of the blog posts are really technical subjects. Some of them are very preliminary subjects like standard template or standard values, things like that, that really are not very good topics for blogs, but having a single URL where I can provide a bunch of content and a list of links to related resources is really useful when somebody has any question about standard values or things like that. So that's what I was trying to do after some time with the blog. I would say that I'm not any different than any of the developers in this room. A lot of you guys are actually probably better developers than me. The differences, from my perspective, are that I have been very lucky. I've just been in the right place at the right time, and I've been allowed to do this stuff that other people don't necessarily find time to do. So any of you could do what I do if you worked for an organization that allowed the time and if you had the interest. So what I'm saying is that when you start presenting yourself as a subject matter expert, that's what makes you a subject matter expert. So there's no hurdle you have to overcome. You just need to get started. And the hardest thing about blogging is getting started. And I think everybody here that owns a blog probably knows that. You get these blocks where you don't feel that it's good enough to publish, or you have other projects that you're trying to work on that are competing for your time. And what most people are looking for in a blog is not anything near perfection. They're looking for pointers, they're looking for information, they're looking for some form of direction. And so stuff that you consider to be common sense, other people don't know. It's not their common sense. And so when you start blogging, you're basically sharing what you know or what's second nature to you, but that's really valuable and useful information to other people. So I think the blogs are probably the best documentation about Sitecore. And I'm not talking about my blog, I'm talking about everybody's blogs that are out there. That's where I learned about Sitecore. I read some of the documentation, but mostly I'm looking at what people are actually doing with the product. Another challenge with documentation is that it's so general and generic, and it covers the basics. And what's great about the blogs is they get into very specific use cases of what people are actually using the product for, which the documentation might not cover. So I find a lot more value in the blogs than the documentation itself. And the blogs address the specific areas of need for information where the documentation is so general that it's less useful for me. It's maybe useful when I'm starting, or when Sitecore 8 is released and I want to find out what's new or things like that, but it's not useful for when I'm in a project and I need to answer a specific question about how to code something, or it's less useful in those cases. And so, I mean, blogging, and I'm also, mentoring is really important. I've had a few mentors in my career, and these are people that have just, I mean, my first professor in college in computer information systems that led to my career, that I'll hopefully have time to talk about, was so important in shaping my perspective of technology and the industry, and in really making my career. And then when I joined Sitecore, Jana Hansen, president of North American operations, was pretty much my second mentor and taught me more on the business side of how to do business ethically and still make money. So when I highly recommend that you find somebody to mentor, or that you find somebody to mentor you, because that relationship, it keeps you interested and it makes it exciting and personal, as opposed to just work and money, and it benefits everybody. It benefits the mentor and the subject of the mentorship. So I highly recommend that you try to find a way to get involved in mentoring programs. And it doesn't have to be formal. It can be as simple as a new developer joins your organization and you choose to make yourself available to answer their questions. So being inviting to that developer instead of being an intimidating resource that they have to ask questions and they feel embarrassed, or they feel like they're consuming your time and things like that. And also having a welcoming community, I think, is really important. I mean, I just love the Sitecore community. I've worked with other CMS products, and I've worked with other technologies, and the community just hasn't been as friendly. It hasn't been as accessible. It hasn't been as open, and it hasn't been as just free-flowing as the Sitecore community. And I think that has to do a little bit with the kind of developers that choose to work with Sitecore. I think that they're generally pretty smart people. If you've chosen Sitecore, you've probably gone out and done the research and you have a pretty good idea of what's available in the CMS space, and you've done the critical thinking to pick Sitecore as the solution for your company. You've chosen to work with it. So those are generally like-minded people, and my experience is that those have been good people. Almost everybody in the Sitecore community is a friendly, helpful, useful, just people that I like to hang out with. So a lot of the people in the Sitecore community I actually consider my friends on a personal basis, not just on a we're work acquaintances where we have a business relationship. And another thing I would point out is that we're all really standing on the shoulders of the giants. So I didn't invent the internet. I didn't write C#. I've never written a compiler, at least not since college. So I'm benefiting from the work that everybody else has done. And so the work that I'm doing now is just adding to that human knowledge base. And in my case, it's specific to Sitecore. So those are kind of my goals for this presentation, is to just get those points across. So then I'm going to switch completely to basically my history and how I got to where I am. And I'm going to start all the way back when I was 5 years old, because at that age, I got a mechanical typewriter, and I don't remember how I got it. It was probably a Christmas present, but it didn't have any electricity. You had to really press the keys really hard. And why this is important to me is that experience taught me how to type, and how to type without making mistakes, because if you've ever worked with a manual typewriter, correcting errors is just a disaster. You have to roll the sheet out and use the whiteout or use the erase tape and try and roll the sheet back in, and it's never aligned quite right, and you can always see the old. Anyway, that taught me how to type. But what was really nice about that machine is that it had a function key that would switch the ribbon from black to red, so I could type in red and black. And that taught me about special keys, which I'm a super keyboard enthusiast. When the mouse came out, I tried not to use it. I thought I'll never have to use that thing because I can do anything with the keyboard. And I'd still rather work in a shell than in a graphical user interface. But I have learned how to use the mouse. But that's taught me how to type. And typing has been a huge part of my career. One of the reasons that I was able to publish this book is because I can type in 90 to 120 words per minute, and I can do about that speed with code as well, and special characters. And so that has been so productive for me. Just the typing has really enhanced my productivity. So the first real computer experience I got was in 5th grade. I had a teacher that was really good at math, and I've always liked math. I like a lot of things conceptually, maybe not so technically. So about math, I like to understand how math works, but I don't necessarily like to do all the operations. And so I had a teacher in 5th grade that brought a VIC 20 to school. Anybody work at a VIC 20? All right. So if I remember correctly, a VIC 20 was basically a basic interpreter. You turned it on and you could do run or load, but you would be in a shell that would let you type in basic programs. So if you used the computer, it was basically one of the first personal computers, the kind that you plug into a television. There were no monitors, definitely weren't any flat screens back then.
Like a TRS-80 color computer.
Actually, more basic than a TRS-80. So the VIC 20, I think, had 4 colors. The TRS-80, I'm pretty sure had 16 colors. I did TRS-80 programming too. So VIC 20, my teacher in 5th grade programmed tic-tac-toe in 3.5K of RAM in BASIC. And I was just stunned. I mean, the fact that I could tell a device to think for me and to act like a person in some sense, to interact with something that I had, like a brain I had created, it was just such a compelling concept for me. So I immediately said, well, tic-tac-toe, that's easy. I'm going to do Connect 4. It's not possible to write Connect 4 in 3.5K of BASIC. I don't think it's possible. So that was my kind of first computing experience, and that was frustrating for me because then I found the limitations of the system. There's only, sure, I can completely understand what's in every single memory address on the system. I can, at that time, each memory address was a character on the screen, so you would peek or poke a certain memory address to figure out what character was there, what color, what background color it had. You can kind of have an understanding of what the entire state of the machine at one time. But it was too finite. There just wasn't enough machine there to do all the things that we needed. So a friend of mine had a Commodore 64, and that's basically the same platform, but with 64K of RAM instead of 3.5K. And it was really exciting. My brothers and I got some Christmas money from our grandparents, and we pooled our money, and we bought a $200 Commodore 64 which was a ton of money, but it was basically, this was the beginning of the PC revolution. So I feel like I was involved in the development of the original PC, and I've watched the whole development of the internet. So my career has been really interesting from 5th grade on to now, just this huge progression of technology. So we got a Commodore 64, and my parents really discouraged it. They thought it was a 2600 or something. They thought it was a video game console. So they didn't really want me using it. Also, again, you plugged your computer into a TV screen back then, so they thought I was making an excuse to get a TV in my room so I could watch UHF programming and stuff instead of going to sleep. So they really discouraged me from using the system. And it's true, my brothers were using it as a gaming platform, but I was reading the reference manuals and programming and really learning how to use the system. But they kind of discouraged me from it. So in high school, I lost track of computers and had other interests in high school, of course. But when I got to college, one of my roommates had CompuServe. And so I'm kind of trying to point out some of the significant shifts that I've seen in the industry in my time. So the Commodore program, or those early personal computers, were a shift, but then CompuServe and things like that could connect to networks to exchange information with other people. That was a huge shift. Before computers could communicate with each other, they weren't nearly as much used. Think about a fax machine if there are no other fax machines. It's not very much used. So computers were kind of similar. You could get them to do some stuff, but if you couldn't communicate, they weren't that valuable. So in college, I did almost every job you can imagine. I was a busboy, I tutored, I did landscaping, I helped people move, I did almost everything possible except for work with computers. And I studied almost every field out there. I studied journalism and psychology and developmental psychology and philosophy and physics and all these kind of things. And towards the end of my college time, I realized that I didn't have very good career prospects. I hadn't really gotten a degree that would make me a good career. And so I decided to go back. I'd been reading all these books about programming in C and C++, and I bought compilers and things like that. And I decided I'll go back for a year and try and get some kind of certificate or a second major or something. And I was able to skip a bunch of prerequisites because I'm not sure how I skipped the prerequisites, but I went straight into 300 level classes, which is usually your third year. And I took an RDBMS class on SQL Server, or not on SQL Server, on Oracle, and that Oracle was amazing. I mean, the concept of a relational database and the applications that enabled versus what a single personal computer could provide, that was really, really exciting stuff for me. But the first day the teacher asked the class, does anybody want to be a teacher's aide? And 150 people got up and left the room. And I was just shocked. Like, why would you not want to make this connection with this professor? Why are you even in this class if you don't want to have that relationship? So that professor, I went up to the podium and became his teacher's aide, and he's really my first mentor. He taught me more. He had a PhD in programmer productivity, which is a little bit different than programming. It's more about management and philosophy and how to motivate people and things like that. But he also had really strong technical skills. He'd come out of the Navy and things like that. So I worked with him teaching labs and grading tests and doing all that kind of work, recording grades. And at the end of the year, I said, I need to use you as my reference for my summer job search. I was going to go work at a cable company or the Pacific Gas and Electric or whatever. And he said, don't bother looking for a job. I'll hire you at this consultancy that I run on the side. He had a consultancy where he was doing EDI. Anybody here done EDI or know what EDI is? Great. That's actually much bigger than the Ohio group. They had, I think, one person that raised their hand. EDI is a kind of a precursor to electronic commerce and XML in a sense. It's a standard format for exchanging documents over networks. So if a company has purchase orders that they want to send electronically instead of on paper, they create a file, they upload it to a value-added network. You actually dialed into a modem bank and you uploaded your files, and then the other partners would connect to that same modem bank, or these value-added networks would have connections with other value-added networks, and they would exchange your files for you. And that was kind of the illusion of security. And then the other company would download it, and they would send an acknowledgement, which was a different EDI document that would come back. And the reason I mentioned this is because the great thing about EDI for me was that every aspect of the business has an EDI transaction that goes along with it. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about accounts receivable, where you have invoices, or accounts payable, order management. I was working in the silicon industry, so test results for silicon wafers or point of sale transactions, inventory. EDI touches almost every aspect of the business that has a business system behind it. And so that taught me a ton about how businesses work, all of the different aspects of a business. So I took that job for the summer, and immediately the consultancy that he ran lost the contract with their major client, which was Xilinx, which is a silicon company in the Valley. They make field programmable gate arrays and CMOS devices and things like that. They're still out there. And so that company made me an offer to come down to Silicon Valley. And I was 23 and I was just on top of the world. I had no real training in this field. And I was getting this amazing opportunity to go do that kind of stuff. And so I moved down to Silicon Valley and I did that for a couple of years. And then I quit and they said, well, we'll relocate you to Ireland if you stay on. So I moved to Ireland and made a team there. And then I quit again because I really wanted to go back to college. I went back to college and college was really boring. I'd been in the industry for about 3 years working with really all sorts of business systems, and college was much too theoretical and much too homeworky. It just felt like busy work. And I knew I could go make money. And then I met my wife, and college was just out the window. So I have to say I never graduated college. I don't have a degree in this field. But I might go back, and I think they would probably give me an honorary degree if I really pressured them for it. So then I did EDI for another couple of months. This was at the .com period, so there was a lot of stuff happening on the web. And I put my resume, I don't remember when Monster started, but somehow I put my resume on the web. Maybe it was through Hot Jobs, or I don't remember what service it was. But I got contacted by a recruiter in San Diego that wanted me to do interwoven projects. So they had an interwoven consultancy. And I had no idea. I had done some web programming. I had actually done Java applets. Anybody ever programmed a Java applet? So my story about Java applets is anytime you saw Java applet initializing, you knew the browser was about to crash. So I never was very successful with Java, but I did do some work in that area. So I started working with interwoven, which was kind of C, kind of Perl, kind of Java, kind of just a hodgepodge of technologies. But I was doing these 1-week projects. I was teaching their classes for them, and I was doing these kind of show up, do a week of consulting, and get out of there. And what was great about that was that I got to expose to so many different industries. So healthcare and insurance, and I ended up working in pretty much every industry out there. So finance, I worked for US Bank, I worked for Intel, that's probably one of the best places I ever worked. John Deere, or I worked for Symantec, I worked for Network Associates, I worked for I can't even remember all the projects I worked for, but I ended up in a position where companies were hiring me to pick a CMS platform for them. So maybe they had interwoven and they were getting kind of tired of it and they were looking for a next generation CMS. So I was really following the CMS market and seeing what was out there. And while I was doing that, I actually did a very similar role for interwoven as what I did for Sitecore. I had 1,500 posts on their developer network, and I have a trophy from interwoven for my posts. So it's kind of interesting that I have a trophy from one of our biggest competitors when I started out in this industry. But and when I joined Sitecore, they completely cut off my access to their developer network. So that's what I mean by not a welcoming community. If I post on their developer network, I think that's my content, and for them to cut me off from that, that's a company that I consider unethical and don't want to work with them anymore. So it's really important to me that Sitecore not provide those kind of experiences to our community members. So first with EDI, I worked with a bunch of different types of business systems, and then from working with interwoven, I worked with a bunch of different verticals or different industries. And one of the things that's similar to EDI and CMS is that they're both hubs for the organization. So if you think of most CMSs, you can build a standalone website with a CMS and it doesn't integrate with anything. But most complex or significant CMS implementations interact with other systems. So maybe it ties in an LDAP for authentication and a CRM for customer profile information, or maybe if you're doing e-commerce, you need to get inventory from some other system, or pricing, or all these kind of things. And so EDI and CMS are actually very similar in that regard. They kind of function as hubs that aggregate data from all the different applications within the organization. So it was just it worked out really well that I had these kind of experiences. And so I was working for Stanford hospitals and clinics. They had an interwoven implementation that they wanted to replace, and they asked me to come in and do the research. And that's when I first came across Sitecore. And because of my background, Sitecore was horrible at marketing. I mean, it was a Danish company. Danes have a very different perspective on what's important in life, and they're not very good at marketing and sales and those kind of things, but they're very good at developing software. And so I was able to see through the complete lack of marketing collateral and see the product, and not just see the product, but see the architecture of the product. And this was in the Sitecore 4 days. And I looked at the product and said, if I had had this product, say at Intel, 90% of the work that I did building infrastructure, CMS infrastructure, was already in this product. I wouldn't have had to build that. And it was just such a friendly platform for me as a developer, so extensible. I knew that every CMS implementation in the world, I've always customized everything that I've done. And Sitecore is really built for that kind of customization. And I just said, this is the one I want to work with. So I contacted Bjorn, who's the president of North America, and I said, I want to work with this product. And he said, sure, I'll send you some brochures. And I said, don't send me the brochures, send me the product. And I don't even want your documentation, I don't want your training, I just want the product. And I was just really impressed. So then I went to the training, and then I wanted to be a consultant, which is what I've been doing for the last 5 years with Interwoven, but Sitecore doesn't do consulting. We have this partner model where we have the partners that do the implementations for our customers. So there was really no role doing what I wanted to do. So I had to make a big step in what I'm able to do. So I'm not the kind of person that likes to be on stage in front of people. I'd much rather be programming and typing. So I had to move into a role being a sales engineer, which is a very different kind of role than doing coding. And I also was an instructor, so I was flying around the country teaching classes for people. But I was also, setting up the network or fixing the fax machine, putting cartridges in the printer, and doing like everything. It was just me and Bjorn in whole North America. So I've been there. Technically I'm somewhere between the 2nd and the 4th employee in North America, and maybe like the 15th employee within Sitecore. But I've been here for 11 years now, since 2004. So I did that for about 3 years. I did the sales demos and taught the training. And then I got really burned out on the travel. I was going to the same cities over and over again, teaching the same classes over and over again, answering the same questions over and over again. My goal as a programmer is always to automate or document myself out of a job. And I couldn't do that because that's a lot. It's a mandatory live role. Sales demos and instruction are mandatory live roles. So I got really burnt out on the travel and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And they let me write documentation for 3 years. So if you've read the presentation reference, presentation cookbook, data definition reference, data definition cookbook, security reference, those kind of resources, I wrote the first drafts of all those things. And I spent about 3 years doing that. And when the documentation felt like it was done for the version that we had at that time, I just reported to management, I don't think that I can add much more value here. And so they gave me a role as a consulting product architect, which is kind of what I've been doing since then. They give me builds of the product before they hit the market. I look at the build without any documentation and look at the way they've implemented the features and try to give them feedback on, people are going to be needing this, or you need to make changes here, or if I find bugs, I'll report them. So in that sense, I had some influence on the product. I could kind of fix things right before they hit production, but I couldn't shape major features. So again, I don't really have any significant influence over product. And while I was doing that, I knew I wanted to continue doing developer education, but not through the documentation team, because documentation is kind of cumbersome. So I was trying to do documentation through the blog. So filling gaps in our documentation through the blog, preparing blog posts before we release product, so that we would have data available the day that we release the product, and getting the blog posts out based on that. So I did that for a few years, and then Bjorn asked me to write the book. And this book, it's definitely not my proudest moment, my favorite work. It's probably the hardest thing that I've ever done. And the reason for that was partially the timeline, but partially because I didn't know what I was getting into. What was great about the book was that I had all that information that I gathered for those PDFs, and I had all the blog posts. So I had basically all the information, and I could type. Some of the challenges that I had were that we had a child right around the time that I was writing the book. We relocated twice. So we left California and went to Nevada, then we left Nevada and went to Portland. And then my basement flooded, which was a big nightmare for weeks. And this was all happening during the 6 months that I had 3 months to write the book, and then about a month and a half to do the editing and work with the publisher, and then another month and a half kind of logistics to get it out there. This is the only project in my career where I have been late with deliverables. It really was the most significant undertaking I've ever done. I didn't have an office, so I was actually working on a stool in my kitchen at a laptop. It was really challenging. Anyway, I'm glad it's done. I'll say I'll never do it again. I'm never going to write another Sitecore book. There's never going to be a professional Sitecore development 8 or 9. It's almost impossible to synchronize a product release cycle with a physical book release cycle. Publishers, it's just the timing's off. If you think about the whole writing, editing, publishing cycle, it's kind of minimum 6 months. So we're always going to be 6 months behind where our product is. So. And I think that the blogs are just a better way of getting information out. I think the book is good for getting into the fundamentals, for kind of, I'm on a plane or I'm going to the training and I want to read up and get all the information in one kind of sequential place. But in terms of being a reference, I don't use it as a reference. I've probably picked it up as a reference once or twice since I wrote it, and I think that was 3 or 4 years ago that I wrote it. So I don't personally think that the book has a lot of value. So in that regard. So I wrote the book, and then I was still doing the blogging, and they were starting to have me. This is when kind of Sitecore John happened, where I created a Twitter account to promote my blogs, and that's kind of where I started getting fans and stuff. People started to know who I was, and then I kind of burnt out on the blogging. I really burnt out on the blogging, because what happens is I have maybe 550 blog posts out there, and people are asking questions constantly. And the question might not have anything to do with the blog post. So and I feel really bad if I don't respond to a question. So each question is asking me, can you write another blog post? Or can you research this subject for me? Or can you write this code for me? Or can you go fix the code that you wrote 5 years ago? Or, and I'll say another thing. Blogging your code, it's kind of like wearing your underwear in public. So it's kind of, you don't want to see it. So I got kind of burnt out on the blogging, and I was looking for a new role within Sitecore. And at that time, that's when Sitecore was delivering the doc.sitecore.net project, that was the beginning of that. It was November of, I guess, 2013 was when they were starting that. And the project was in bad shape. Sitecore is relatively good at building a web content management platform, but it's really bad at building websites with its own platform. And so our partners know how to build websites with our tools. We're not really that good at that. And so, if you think about the www.sitecore.net or the SDN site, these are not very good sites. They're web forms, they're kind of legacy, they're kind of cluttered, and they're just not modern. They're not scalable, they're just not designed for this kind of stuff. So not only that, but the documentation team would much rather continue writing PDFs in Word than have a website, because documentation people, they like to write documents. They don't like to write web pages. So we had some political challenges that we had to deal with. So they asked me to take an technical architect role on that project. I feel like I didn't do anything on that project. I didn't do any coding. I didn't do any real architecture. I developed a prototype for converting Word documents to HTML, but mostly I just kind of poked people and said, you need to do your job, and you need to do your job, and it's going to be this way. And so it was almost more of a management role. But that was one of the most successful Sitecore sites that we've ever released. And I'm not talking about the content or the information architecture, and you can complain about that or be happy about that, but I'm talking about just getting the project into production and having it be a relatively quality solution that performs well and is stable. So, it seems like pretty minor requirements, but if you think about Sitecore.net over last summer, it was not performing and it was not very stable. So Sitecore, the executives were really happy with the work I did on that project, where I think I didn't do any work. So as a result of that, now they want me to take that same role on our other properties. So the marketing site, the developer network, or the partner network, basically all of our customer-facing properties, they want me to try and do the same thing to those properties, which is it's for me to try and do that for all those properties, working with all those different teams, it's just way too time consuming to do that and to do the stuff that I've been doing historically. So they want me to do that with 80% of my time, and with 20% of the time, they think I can still do the role that I used to do. Just really, like, I can't read the blogs with 20% of my time, let alone do blogging or respond to comments on my blog. So from my perspective, I feel like the role that I had been in is over. And there's some good parts and bad parts about that. I mean, it definitely has burned me out in a lot of ways, because I'm not necessarily learning as much about Sitecore 8 and things like that as I would like to. So when people are asking me basic CMS questions, I'm still focusing on technology that we've had since Sitecore 6 or Sitecore 5. And I really need to be focusing on Sitecore 8 to maintain my position within the company. So it's a good thing, but it's going to be challenging for me because I've never managed a production Sitecore solution before. I've never really been involved with Sitecore projects before. I've always kind of just done this, I'm guessing this might work for you, here's the code, try it and test it. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing. The title, or the role title, is Chief Architect for Web Properties. And I guess I start on Monday doing that. So that's where I'm going. So that's my whole presentation. Some things I kind of want to reiterate. It's really important that we're always paying attention to new technologies that are coming out. So, you know, things that don't seem very relevant to you today might be relevant in 6 months to a year. There's a phrase that the half-life of information in our industry is about 2 years. So what you know today, probably about half of it's going to be irrelevant in about 2 years. So you have to constantly be learning. And that works great for my personality type. I'm always interested in learning new information. And I don't mean just about CMS and .NET, but look for new JavaScript libraries and new, where are the HTML and CSS standards going? Just don't let yourself fall behind. Try and be at the forefront of those changes. And another thing that's been really valuable for me is to study all aspects of the business. So not just focus on what's assigned to me, but try to branch out and talk to people that do other things and learn what they're doing. Foster the community, so help the other developers regardless of how simple their questions are. And again, this is kind of my last point, but when you publish something, that's what makes you a subject matter expert. So, and it's not, publishing a blog, it's good for you and it's good for your company. So you kind of want your blog to be branded as part of the organization that you work for so that you can steer leads towards your organization. But you also want to make your own personal name clear so that it's not just about your company, but it's about you. And you want to be a trusted resource. So one of the big things for me has been establishing trust, which is why I see marketing as the dark side. I don't want to ever go in that direction. And the blog, it is marketing, right? So even though it's true, and I do my caveats about I found a bug here in Sitecore, this code might not work for you, that leads to credibility. So, don't look at a blog as just a pure marketing thing. It's really just who you are. It's just tell people who you are and share your common sense and your experience and make time for it. And hopefully your employer makes time for you to make time for it. And that's really my whole presentation. I don't know if we have an agenda after that. There are 2 bottle openers up here for if anybody wants to grab them. I think we were going to give away the books, but we didn't have we have a random number generator, or does anybody not have a book? There are a few people that don't have books.
We do like books for best questions.
That's what I was.
So no tech support questions, no future product questions.
That's sharp question.
Sure.
How about
Number 64.
marketplace.sitecore.net, maybe get a little faster?
Faster.
That's on you now, right?
That's a good question.
I didn't realize that was on my list.
Yeah, but check by Monday.
So marketplace is slow. That's a common
Sometimes on the first load.
It's slow a lot of the time, actually. The other thing that I see here is if I'm logged into Sitecore on a local instance and I go to a new tab, let's say Chrome, and then I go to the marketplace, I get kicked off to the login screen on the marketplace.
Okay.
And I think I reported that.
I know that there are some authentication issues on the marketplace, but it's usually if it's using the social login functionality as opposed to the raw Sitecore login functionality. What I would say, and I put myself at huge risk by doing this, but my email address
Oh, boy.
is jw@sitecore.net. So I'm just John West, and my email address is jw. So if you can, like, I'm going to forget what you guys just said. So if you can tell me those specifics, I'll probably remember them.
You're being broadcast live and recorded on YouTube.
Yeah.
We only got 3 viewers.
Michael and Lars.
So follow up with me on that. And I mean, and I would say this for everybody, any Sitecore property that you're having challenges with, let me know about it. And Twitter, I'm kind of getting off Twitter, so that's not the best way to contact me. I'm kind of old school, so email is really always the best way to contact me. But yeah, if you tell me your issue, and if you just remind me that it's slow, or if you can tell me when it's slow, or any pattern you can find to it, we'll look into that. Doc.sitecore.net, dev.sitecore.net, community.sitecore.net, and marketplace.sitecore.net. If I understand correctly, they're all on the same server, they're all on the same infrastructure, and so if one underperforms, I would expect them all to underperform, but if only one of them's underperforming, it's probably a technical issue with the solution, so that we should look at. But that's the first I've heard of it, so that's interesting.
People tweet about it.
All right, Nick gets a book. Any other questions? Sure.
So as you start talking, have you seen your communication skills or written skills improve? That's one thing I struggle with. As I start talking.
So there are.
Especially because I feel like it's not good.
I would say that the book was actually a bigger thing in fixing my writing. I was not a bad writer to begin with, but when you work with a publisher, they provide editors, and those editors teach you things like, I can't even remember all the little things, but little things that make your writing more clear, like when to use rather instead of another word. Just little tiny things like that. That was really valuable for improving my writing. What's been valuable about the blogs is that it just goes back to what you learned in high school about writing. You start with an introduction, you tell them what you're going to tell them, you've got to provide headings and things like that, and then you should have some kind of conclusion. And I don't always do that, I'm just too lazy, or sometimes it's really redundant to do it that way. But it really does have value to have a structure. This is, when I started writing the PDFs, the guy that I was working for, Kerry Bellaros, that some of you might know or have heard of, he was a real stickler for, you need to have an outline before you write the document. Well, that's not how I write. I don't know what I'm going to write until I write it. And so I'll generally write things twice. I'll write something to gather the content, and then I'll think about it and come up with a structure, and then put the content back into that structure. So anything significant, I'll go that route. And it's not just about blogging and writing books and things like that, but it's also about email. I think that we get a little lazy or sporadic, or we're trying to reply really quickly with our emails. So I have some rules for emails. Like if I have questions, I number my questions. And this really comes from working with Ukrainians, because they're trying to master your English, and it doesn't always work out. But if you number your questions and make them very specific, it's very hard for someone to respond to that without providing numbered answers to those questions. So, I do the same thing with emails. I'll actually compose an email in Word, I'll do an introduction, I'll do my numbered questions, and then I'll put the details below that. So I would say that the book, the PDFs, and the blog all together have totally changed the way that I write things. And it's improved all of my communications. So in terms of my grammar and spelling, my spelling's still terrible. I completely count on Word for that. Grammar, I use Grammar Check. There are certain rules that I try to enforce, like try not to use passive voice, and I try not to use abbreviations and things like that. I try not to use apostrophes, and certain things like that. But I can't give you any general guidance. I would just say the more you write, the better your writing will get. And the hardest part is just getting started. It's just, and again, people are just looking for pointers. They're not looking for perfection, especially in blogs. It's just scraps. They're looking for scraps of information and mostly they're looking for code that they can cut and paste. That's the reality.
Do you have a blog platform that you would recommend? Like what blogging platform would you recommend?
Be careful.
Give me my book.
So if I were to write a blogging system for Sitecore, I would do what I did for the documentation team, which was to write a plugin that lets me drop a Microsoft Word document into a file drop area field, so a web dev field, and then converts that Word document to HTML. Because for me, I get so much value out of Word. that I don't get out of a WYSIWYG text editor. I get grammar check, I get spell check, I get the ability to edit offline, I can version my document, I can mail it to somebody and have revision tracking, all those kind of things that I cannot get in a web platform. So that would be my kind of first response to that, was that I would do something custom, and I would do it around Word, just because I love Word. I mean, Word was bad for a long time. It was unstable and had created bad markup and things like that. But the new libraries for working with Word documents are really nice to work with, and you can create clean HTML from them. Just one comment on that: I would never convert a Word document to HTML. I would walk the Word document and create HTML, because if you use conversion tools, you get really bad markup. But if you just walk and say, here's a paragraph, okay, I need a P tag. Here's a bold element, I need a strong tag. If you just walk through the document and do it that way, then it's relatively clean. The other two, I definitely can't say that on camera, but I think Weblog is what everybody's using.
Not as many as you'd think, because you have to have a Sitecore license for that.
Okay.
Even MVPs, they're still working on getting us our Sitecore licenses.
What I probably wouldn't do is just use the rich text editor in Sitecore, because I just don't think that that's, for me, blogging every day, I don't want to be in that environment every day, all day long. So, and because blogging, that's most of what you're doing is just writing one big body of content. I just don't think that's the right tool.
If you're a developer, sorry to
Sure.
jump in, but I'd use something that supports Markdown. And I hope that maybe some developer out there would like to contribute to Weblog and add, a nice Markdown support for Weblog.
I would like to see that too.
There's some Markdown marketplace.
Yeah, there's a Markdown field type, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a few different things out there.
But what really made it work for the documentation team was using the file drop area field, so that they could work on their workstation and then drag the file into Sitecore. So then you can use all the offline tools and not have to integrate with them in Sitecore. You actually, WebDAV, anybody ever used WebDAV? Anybody heard like really bad things about WebDAV? WebDAV's terrible. It's terrible, and the reason it's terrible is because of the Internet Explorer implementations of WebDAV. But once you get it working, it's great. It's just you go into the CMS, you click a button, it opens Word, you save, it saves it back into the CMS. You never have any upload, download process. So it's a really seamless process for the user if you can get WebDAV to work. And so that's why I would recommend that approach. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I was hoping you'd say WordPress or something like that.
I kind of miss WordPress. My blog was originally on WordPress, and it was actually originally on live.microsoft, whatever
Sure.
that thing was. And then they moved it to WordPress, and I do miss it, because WordPress is a great blogging platform. I don't think WordPress is a great CMS, but I think it's a good blogging platform.
In terms of blogging, I started a blog recently, and I have young kids that don't get a lot of time to do as much as I want. As far as avoiding lots of noise with like blog post comments, have you always had comments enabled on there, or do you ever have just like contact me at this place? Like, how do you filter that so that you have time to respond like legit?
I don't have time to respond to it, is the honest reality of it. And it gets to be a lot of spam. And I'll literally delete things that if they post a link. So the way the comments work on the Sitecore.net blogs is that it creates an item in Sitecore and it creates an object in Workbox. So I go into the Workbox, and it's really time consuming to go through that and delete all those comments and the spam comments. But any comment that has a link in it, I think should probably just delete it, because almost all of those are people trying to promote their search engine optimization service or something else. But it's interesting because you'll see that if you go to certain news sites, some news articles will have comments enabled and some won't have comments enabled, because they know this subject is going to lead to all sorts of nastiness that we don't want to see. But I've never disabled commenting. So, and maybe that's worked to my disadvantage, because it really has increased my workload. But at the same time, sometimes the comments add a great deal of value. I'm thinking back to Sean Carney had a blog post about, we had these competing blog posts about, if you're going to create a Visual Studio project, do you create it inside the document root, or do you create it in a separate place and copy it over? And we had this long back and forth in the comments where we were linking to each other's blogs. And for somebody reading that blog post, I would say, if you're going to read my blog posts, you should read all the comments, because the best information is probably at the bottom of the comments, the most current information. So those comments add so much value that I can't really see myself deleting them, and I just have to deal with or disabling them. I just have to deal with the overhead of approving it and deleting the spam. Right? Yeah. And have some robots that are deleting the spam for you that you can.
And especially when your own comments and a lot of your articles are links to other relevant content.
Right. So if you look through my blog post, you'll see many comments that it's just a URL with my name, which is here's some more content on this subject. And I think that is really useful. I mean, because I can't remember everything that I've written or everything that I found. And so trying to have that's why I did the whole all about insert options, that whole series, is because I wanted to have one place to go where I could find all the resources for a specific topic.
We're implementing Sitecore right now, having some issues with web forms for marketers. What we're waiting on is we're going to implement this MongoDB. Are you familiar with what this year? You've been doing a lot of documentation on that?
No, because
I don't know much about MongoDB.
I really have not had a chance to look at. So 7 came out and I looked at the content search APIs. 7.1 came out and I looked into speed. 7.2 came out and it had the kind of multi-threaded publication, and that wasn't that significant for me as a developer, so I didn't feel I had to look at it. 7.5 came out and I never had time to look at it. And 8 has come out since then, and those both use Mongo. And I read a book about Mongo. You know, I kind of understand it from a conceptual perspective, but I've never actually worked with Mongo. So I'm not the right resource to answer that. Again, if you email me, I might be able to connect you with somebody that could answer your questions. But, so this new role, and maybe in a month I'll know something, but I need to learn that myself. And so web forms for marketers, are you using MVC or are you using web forms? So you're using MVC. Are there specific challenges with that or with Mongo only?
It seems right now the data reporting on it. Forms.
So I mean, you're best off filing a support case through a developer about that, but you can also contact me directly. One of the things that I can do is escalate your support cases. So if you're having a support case that you're not getting the quality of response or you're not getting the progress that you need, you can email me the support case ID and I can get it escalated within the company. But I can't necessarily answer that question. But I need to learn those things. I need to learn web forms for marketers. See if the CMS product is big enough that I thought that it was all I needed to learn, or not all I needed to learn, but all I could learn. And now that I have this other role, I need to, because we're using web forms for marketers on our sites, and we're using Mongo on our sites, and I just don't know those things, and I need to learn them myself.
I guess, can you speak to that? I mean, you've been obviously working with products since Sitecore 4, and over the years, everything from multi-server support to Speak and the rules engine and Mongo. I mean, the platform is obviously growing to the point where a single developer can't be expert on everything, right?
I guess I would agree with that. I mean, what's good about that progression is that most of those are enhancements. So there's been very little re-architecture in that process. If I go all the way back to Sitecore 4, the fundamental concepts of things like data templates, not standard values, but data templates, the standard template, fields, items, even the presentation components like layouts, placeholders, renderings, all of that stuff has stayed the same. The only major architectural shift in that sense between 4 and 8 is that we changed a concept called layout groups to the concept of devices, which was a feature addition. So this book is still relevant in that sense, that even though it was written for 6.5, that foundation is still relevant for 8. Sorry, I lost the question.
Just the concept, can
I'm going to say it's impossible.
Yeah, I would say it's impossible.
There's too much in the system to know everything. Plus all the interfaces going into it.
It would take years. It would really take years to be an expert on the entire system. So I think you'll have different people within your organization that are specialists on different things. So, like me, all of my stuff is specialized in CMS, and it's really on the back end, like the pipelines and web config and all of those kind of things. But I know very little about the front end, so I don't know Speak at all. Am I going to learn Speak? Well, I'm not really a JavaScript developer, and Speak is really about JavaScript, so I don't think I'll ever learn Speak. And are those really the same skills? Is it building a website and building a Speak application to use within the CMS, it makes sense to kind of have a Speak specialist, that's what they do. If you're developing a lot of Speak apps, you might want one or two people that are really focused on Speak, and that those are who you turn to when you need Speak done correctly, and that will lead to greater consistency in the way that you implement Speak. I think it's possible to know the whole system, but if I don't know the whole system, I don't see how anybody could.
You might be able to know the whole system, but not very well, not specifically something like everything, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think.
So like you can pick up like a generalist versus a specialist. It's kind of like a similar paradigm like that.
Do most people have to work in the whole system? I mean, do most people have to do, and I mean, do I need to know Speak, exporting web forms for marketers and CMS, or
Engagement plans.
yeah,
Right.
engagement plans, and email campaign manager, and all that.
Print experience manager.
I think conceptually, you should be able to know all of it, but implementation, I think you need at least one experience to get it. And I don't think that you could ever get there by just reading the documentation and even the blogs and things like that. You really need to get your hands on and do it. And so just the time it would take to exercise every aspect of the system would be significant, just to get experience with all that, and the reality of finding projects that make you exercise all of those different parts of the system. And it's not very common, I would say. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but the difference between impossible and almost impossible is really significant.
Yeah.
So I would say it's almost impossible.
One of the things you talk about is mentoring, and a lot of the informal mentoring. I mean, in the community, it happens all the time, and these guys right next to you are doing it constantly. How come never really a formal mentoring program was ever set up?
By Sitecore?
Exactly.
So as a software company, this is something, having worked as a full-time employee of a company implementing software products, so implementing enterprise systems, which was what I did when I was in the EDI days, and then working as a consultant, so helping companies implement those systems, and then working for a vendor. These are all very different roles in the industry and have a very different perspective. So a consultant's, focusing on their billable hours, they want to make their customer happy, they want to keep the customer on. The full-time employee is trying to kind of reduce their workload and make their stable system. They don't want to get paged in the middle of the night. The vendor, it's really unfair. What makes a software vendor successful is not the quality of the product. It's the quality of the marketing. And if you don't market correctly, if you don't market well, you won't be able to sell your product no matter how good it is. And so as a company, we would really like to focus on the platform, on the product, and on educating about the platform. And we know that will lead to customer success. But that's not what's going to grow its sales. So if you look at it from an ROI perspective, what's the ROI on having a formal mentorship program for Sitecore? Is it going to increase sales? Is it going to increase our average deal size? How is it going to impact our profit margins? Those kind of things. And so it's very hard for me to make a case for investing in those kind of programs at this point. So I can't, any question that starts with why is a really difficult question for me to answer, especially why is the product this way? It's really a hard question to answer. So I don't have a good answer to that, but I'll give that feedback to somebody. I think when I step out of this role, I think the community might feel a gap. And one of the things that I've seen is that people are not very vocal with Sitecore about their complaints. So especially partly because of the partnership model. If there's a bug in the product, the partner can work around it and get a solution into production, and maybe that's in their best interest. So rather than filing a support case and waiting who knows how long for Sitecore to address that issue, they need to come up with a workaround for that solution and get it into production. And so it almost works against us to have that partner model, because if we, as a company, were finding those defects, we would have to fix them, or we would be writing the solution for them, and we might as well incorporate it into the product. But since the partners are doing that, we often don't hear about it. So I really appreciate it when people file support cases, even for little things, even for things that they develop a workaround. How does this relate to your question? So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I think you kind of got it with the ROI.
Okay.
And everything there.
So we got a plaid shirt in the back. Question.
I was wondering if that's what Mongo DB, this site was coming up with the cloud-additional HTTP, right? So that's not out yet, right?
Oh, I believe it's out. I think you have to contact a rep and get into I'm not gonna answer the question because I don't know for sure, but I think that you have to contact Sitecore and I think it might be a limited availability thing.
There's definitely pricing out there, so it's available. You have it.
It's not working.
I was gonna kind of piggyback on that question. I mean, in addition to, like, you kind of allocated blogging, how do we grow this community? I think by a show of hands, you saw we're mainly developers here. It's probably not a stretch that every one of us got at least one ping on LinkedIn this week to come work somewhere else. There's an obvious demand for Sitecore talent.
Huge demand.
What else can we do to kind of
That's a really good question.
kind of spread the good word, but like get more developers that are qualified to build these platforms? There's obviously, like I said, there's obviously a demand out there.
Right. And I mean, what Sitecore's approach to that, right now we're having a problem with our training program scalability. You know, it's very expensive to go to training. People don't want to take the time off from the work to go to training. We only have so many instructors. Running a training organization is like running a separate company. So you've got a product development branch, you've got a sales and marketing branch, and then you've got this whole training organization, which is like a third company. And it's very difficult to scale the training program and very expensive. So what Sitecore is, what almost every vendor out there is already doing, and what we should be doing, and what we're trying to do, is do online training. So if you think about, if you've seen Martina's NBC videos, that's the kind of direction where we'd like to go. So that, and I think that will help us build the community by having the resources out there. In terms of how the partners and the customers can help us with that, I think it's really important to always hire based on profile and aptitude and skill set. So instead of looking just at knowledge, so instead of looking for Sitecore developers, look for people that are willing to learn new technologies, that maybe have some relevant experience and show an interest. And I think that that's the way we'll grow the community, because if we're all just poaching each other as partners, it really works against us. So I mean, I'll hire a Java developer and teach them C#, or I'll hire people that have no CMS experience and teach them how the web works, or I'm willing to do those kind of things. So I'm looking for a profile, somebody that's got a track record that shows me that they work hard, that they can learn. I like people that have worked with a broad variety of technologies, because I think it helps your thinking patterns to, like, I've done Perl programming, you know, I know what not to do. You know, any background and any demonstration of aptitude is acceptable to me. So I would, and another reality is that people coming to Sitecore from Interwoven, it'll teach you some really bad practices about how to do things on the web. And so having a CMS background can actually be a bad thing, because making the paradigm shift to a new platform, you're trying to take your experience from something that wasn't well implemented. It's like trying to port classic ASP to .NET. You don't do a line-by-line port on it. It's a different architecture, so you have to rethink the application. So I wouldn't even necessarily look for people with CMS background. I would look for somebody that shows an interest in learning and hire those people. And I don't know if that helps or not, but
No.
So you're telling us you can rewrite Sitecore in a single line Perl.
it would be a long line.
Cody, do you have a question?
I actually have a response to that. Our engineers do not think that we could have implemented Sitecore on Java and met the performance expectations that we have with the product now. We really think that .NET was the enabling technology for this software.
You were discussing Speak applications before. Do you believe it's worth learning things like Share UI or Speak applications like the future?
No, I mean, I still prefer to work with Share UI because it's all back end, and when I need to do front end stuff, it's a server side call to a job to do something in JavaScript and things like that. So I prefer Share, and I'll never learn Speak. I'll probably never learn Speak, but everything that Sitecore is doing is in Speak from 8 on. So the content editor, I think, is the only application that is actually still in Share. The content editor and probably the desktop. And I think every other application has been rewritten in Speak. The content editor, I think we would rewrite in Speak, but We also have a large number of customers that have customized the content editor, and we've already got the upgrade penalty of going from 6 to 8. And so instead of making them refactor all those customizations, which doesn't really give them any value, if you do the same thing in Speak that you did in Sheer, but it took you 2 months to do it, what was the value of doing that? So in order to support some of the not legacy stuff, but the Sheer stuff, I think we're going to leave the content editor in Sheer for a while. But even that, if I was going to try and do a custom ribbon command, I would try and make it pop up a Speak UI instead of a Sheer UI. So I would say, as much as I know about Sheer and I've invested in learning that, it's probably obsolete information at this point.
And ASP vNext means that you guys eventually have to move that to MVC too, right?
Speak is MVC. Oh, you
Right. All the Sheer stuff is going to have to go away at some point.
Yeah, so I'm not the right person to answer those kind of questions, but we have a lot of challenges with vNext, and so we have programs in place to start addressing those. I'm not totally sure about that. I mean, web forms is still there in vNext if you choose to enable that component. So, but do we look like a modern ASP.NET application if we're saying enable the legacy web form stuff? But we'll have to support web forms because some of our customers will still be using web forms.
Right. Well, guys, we got 2 books left and a bottle of wine.
The bag.
Question on where do you see at least Sitecore playing a role in like web applications that are more single page based? So, say like websites you might have like a lot of product detail pages, but you need a way to get there. Being able to leverage, say, page editor functionality to manage that kind of JavaScript application that might use, Angular or Ember or Knockout and that kind of thing.
That's all way beyond my knowledge. I would say that what I would look at to begin with would be kind of the item web API stuff or the services client, the kind of, so instead of looking at page generation as a kind of just layout details, composing the page with JavaScript by invoking services and stuff. And that's really, I know that's a really general answer, but that would be my recommendation for those kind of scenarios. Does that help at all, or is that?
Yeah, I guess the question was more around, I presently have used the web API for things like that, but it's like taking Sitecore features like, say, page editor or those kind of things and enabling it when the content isn't rendered out from the server.
I would say send me an email on that, and it'd be a good conversation for a discussion that we could have, but I don't have a good answer off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
In Active Commerce, we've done some interesting things with Angular and the page editor that may or may not be a fit depending on your requirements. So Adam or I might also be a resource there.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, we've got one more book, I think. Did anybody that asked a question not get a book? One more book, and then it's all bottle openers. Any more questions?
I don't know if we'll be able to answer this, but one of the biggest selling points on Sitecore used to be, Sitecore was built from the ground up. There was no acquisitions, but a lot of that's kind of changing, and it has to, right, for you to sustain being the best like CMS out there. What do you see like the next acquisition, or what areas does Sitecore need to do better at grow that?
Okay, so I would say that right now we're really targeting e-commerce, and the acquisition of Commerce Server shows that. Although part of the acquisition of Commerce Server is about getting those 200 clients or 2,000 clients and trying to move them towards Sitecore as a platform for that. I would not say that we've never done acquisitions, because if you go back to before 6.3, we had the staging module, which was written by a partner, and Sitecore took ownership of it. The original e-commerce stuff, we acquired a company that had that. We've always got OEM stuff in there, like the rich text editor and things like that. So it's not, and there are tons of libraries in there, like HTML agility packet. And so there are lots of components in there that we didn't develop. Right now, we're really focused on e-commerce and the whole experience management space. And we feel like we're pioneering that space. And I don't know that there's another vendor out there that we would be looking to acquire, because Sitecore is not huge. We're not Adobe, we're not Microsoft. We don't have the kind of resources that those companies have for acquisitions. So I wouldn't expect acquisitions in the short term. They always surprise me with acquisitions. Like that Commerce Server was such a surprise to me. I never would have seen that coming. So I could be totally wrong, but I'm not expecting acquisitions in the short term. And I would say we're going to focus on e-commerce, but more importantly, the experience management features. I wouldn't be surprised if we do more advanced partnerships with service vendors for like mail transport and things like that, but I don't see us acquiring those kind of places. I think you will see a move of Sitecore towards a much more kind of trying to move towards subscription models and service models as opposed to enterprise, just to get the software sale done. All right, well.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm taking this last quote.
All right.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Sure.
Keep yours left, otherwise, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Did you want your book signed? I'll sign it. There are a few bottle openers in one book.
Can you sign my Drupal book?
There you go.
Hey, Art. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We had up to like 4 or 5.